Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Julie Ewington. I'm the head of Australian Art, and my job today is to introduce Louise Weaver, who's here to speak to us about her fantastic work. Louise is a very respected artist from Melbourne. She teaches in painting, surprising, at Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology University. But for us today, she has made this extraordinary installation, multi-part installation, accompanied by the soundtrack recorded at a place I'm sure Louise will tell you about. So Louise is going to speak to you first. Adrian is interpreted by Shane. And then I'm going to come back afterwards for some questions. So, over to you, Louise.
Thank you very much, Julie. First of all, I'd like to actually thank Julie Ewington and also the assistant curator, Bree Richards, for allowing me to have the wonderful opportunity to exhibit in this exhibition. It's been a wonderful experience working with both Julie, Bree and the whole of the team here at the gallery, both through the developmental period of creating the work and also in installing it in the last week, so thank you very much. So the journey with this exhibition began almost 2 years ago when I began thinking about my response to the ideas that Julie and Bree raised as a starting point for a response visually. And I began by thinking about my favourite painting, one of my favourite paintings by Edouard Manet, 1866, coincidentally 100 years before my birth, a painting called Woman with a Parrot. And it's a beautiful painting in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. It's a painting of one of his most famous models, Victorine Meron, and she is standing in a beautiful shell pink silk frock coat, which is a fashionable garment from the time, but also acts almost as a cocoon or an armour of shell pink, almost like a skin armour over her gown. And she's holding and interacting with objects and symbols which relate to the five senses. A violet bouquet that she's holding to her nose to represent smell, a monocle that she has let fall to her lap which represents sight, a beautiful grey parrot which is sound, and an orange which is unfurling with its peel on the ground, which is taste. And that's just to give you an indication of the painting. And my idea was to extend upon that painting into an environment which also related to the idea of the slang term, or one slang term for women, as being a bird. And the idea of the bird hide creating a space which was a camouflage net or a divide, an interval in space and in time, which allowed the situation or the environment for viewing a bird from a vantage point of being unseen. And those ideas relating to the idea of the way that women often are represented traditionally by male artists in the Western world, and that the gaze is often from a male perspective. So all of those ideas were sort of brought together as a starting point, and then simply I began because I also like the idea of developing work in response to other works, and that you're never really sure what the journey will be, and that it unfolds over time in a way as your ideas develop and extend through new circumstances or just a lot of fun that you might be having in the studio working with materials, and being quite intuitive and listening to yourself in terms of what's working visually, because the visual appearance of things is often a way to create a sense of a space which is either real or metaphoric, and one that gives a sense of time unfolding, which might, through the use of various materials, be through centuries, and also be projecting ideas potentially for the future. so that things are not really fixed but always in flux and floating in a way through the physical space. I also thought about the idea of the arrangement of the objects relating to painting composition, and whether that's Western painting or more predominantly perhaps through the ideas of Japanese screen painting or any number of Asian countries that use atmospheric perspective as a device to create a narrative, so a narrative unfolding through time, and that you're not necessarily looking at something in its total encompass environment straight away in one, that it also unfolds perhaps as a scroll, and that you view things from different directions, whether you begin at one side or the other. And so the process of creating the screen involved cutting 7.5 centimetre lengths of plastic and then covering each one with Japanese paper. I'm looking at horrified faces in the audience. I did set myself a rather mammoth task, and I admit that I've been working on this piece solidly for about 18 months. And that I did make other work in between, which is also in this exhibition. And then each of those sections were joined together to make a unit, and then each of those units was joined to make a panel, and then each of the panels was joined to make larger intervals, so that when I was able to arrive at the gallery, I was able to then assemble it as I see it for the first time here in this space. The gold glittery part to the right of the screen came from an experience of being in the garden with my niece, and she picked up the catkins from a silver birch tree and threw them into a spider's web. And I loved the idea of her being able to create a spontaneous abstract motif and spoke to her about what she'd done. And I loved that the pattern and the arrangement could then be made both to resemble that idea, but also to resemble back to birds, the idea of creating a space which would then become a performative environment to attract a mate. So that exists with species such as bowerbirds or with birds of paradise in Papua New Guinea, where they make a clearing, an incursion into an environment and then ornament it or decorate it. And then I'll just speak a little bit about some of the other works in the exhibition. In front of the bird hide is a Tokonoma bamboo pole, and it is 20th century Japanese. It's for bonsai, and it's been encouraged to grow in an exaggerated way using wire tied tightly around it at intervals. And so it has bent its growth pattern one way and then the other. And then at the top is a cast foam object which is covered with carbon fibre and epoxy resin and crochet. And carbon fibre is what's used as a high-tech material for racing cars, for prosthetic limbs for Paralympic athletes. So it provides the highest strength and light weight environment for the material to exist. And in a way it's almost like a contemporary version of what bamboo has been used for historically. The work is called Much Deeping, and in brackets column with growth. And I know Julie really loved the idea that Much Deeping was a title that it came from watching or reading an Agatha Christie novel, and that Much Deeping was actually a fictitious title of a town, a village in the UK where murders happened by requisite accounts. So people could go and book in to have someone knocked off, and that they would never be anywhere involved in the process. So it is about dissecting and killing off things in order to regrow something as a new environment. And so that brings me to a theme which is really related to a lot of the work that I've made, to do with transformation and metamorphosis, and things emerging and evolving over time in different ways. And to my left, your right, is the work Butterfly with Inclined Wings. And that also refers to the monocle that's in the painting that Manet created. And it's about, for me, it's a poetic title which infers the idea of the butterfly evolving from the cocoon, and that the butterfly's wings dry in the sun and harden and become rigid, and then its life cycle is almost at its end. But it also relates to the clawed glass. And the clawed glass was named for Claude Lorraine, who was a fabulous landscape painter in the 17th century. And during the 18th and 19th centuries, hobbyists and travellers who wanted to paint a tonal range, an attractive tonal range which approximated Claude Lorraine's wonderful paintings, would take a small convex painted black mirror or piece of glass in order to hold it up and view the landscape as a level of remove from the real environment. And by doing so would be able to view the tonal approximation that attributed to or equated to a Claude Lorraine painting. And also, in doing so, reminds you of the space that you're looking at, because really the tonal, close range of tonal approximations that I've used, both natural and artificial materials, relates to the idea of Claude Lorraine's tonal range in his paintings. To my right is the work Dark Cherry, and again, when I was talking about materials existing over time, the base is actually an upturned Japanese display table from mid-20th century, but the tree that it was made from is a cherry tree that I think is probably more than 150 years old, because I've tried to count the rings. And I just love the idea, because I'd never seen a cherry tree with such a large circumference in Australia, and it reminded me of our very brief existence here in Australia, and just what a difference our perspective and our perception of landscape is to its former inhabitants and still existing inhabitants, our Indigenous community. And I also wanted to think about it as a display platform, a performance space for birds, and that birds could actually have an environment which created a safe enclosure for their attraction for mates. And the plate at the top almost reminding me of the circus apparatus, of the constantly spinning plates that circus performers sometimes activate. And I always, as a child, was afraid that they were going to fall on me. So it's the tension of the fear that something is going to finish or conclude, and what will be the occurrence beyond that moment when the tension is broken and it shatters to the ground. But it also, in a way, is a metaphor for the way that women need to balance everything in their lives in order to achieve everything that they would like to. And then the last work is Hanging, to my right, which is called Hiding in Plain Sight. Another cheeky metaphor, I suppose, about women in society, but also about a sense of the object as a mute device within the space, something that absorbs sound, something which absorbs light, which is almost aberrant in its form. It's metastasizing and growing and could engulf you if you stood too close. And the idea that it could also be a weaver bird's nest, both a play on my own last name, and also the idea of the nests that are available in Africa, where pairs of up to 300 create communities of habitation which colonise different locations, whether they be telegraph poles or people's rooftops or even trees. So it's looking at nature to provide a sense of a form that exists in reality, and also growing into another space which is invented or fantastic. And so it's both a real landscape, a real environment, but also provides the space for fantasy, imagination, and almost the paranormal. Thank you.
Now, Louise has very kindly said that she would take questions from the audience, and I wondered who would like to start the account. And if is there anybody who has, Agatha.
Thank you, that was a beautiful talk. I just was wondering, when I walked past this work, I didn't know whether I was able to walk onto the platform, and I just wanted you to talk a little bit to maybe what kind of space this is for a viewer. Is it something like you described it as a painting that we apprehend from here, or is it more of a theatrical space or a set? You can't, like, yeah.
That's a good question. Thank you, Agatha. I think it's about people's ideas of what's permitted within a gallery, about what's comfortable. We're constantly asked to not cross the line, which I know is something that you've explored in your work. But also I think it's about the sense of people's comfort with objects and how they manoeuvre objects within a space. And it can be both a performative environment for people to inhabit, to consider themselves in relation to the screen, walk behind it, think about the shadows cast across their face or their form, thinking about the way that that might ornament themselves in some way, and that they're in a way infusing themselves within that environment, and also just dislocating themselves from the everyday into something that might be more of a magical experience. And that, I didn't mention the sound, as Julie said I might, however, but that is kind of something which exaggerates that as well. It is a totally natural field recording, recorded over a series of days in a bush block that my parents, where my parents live, and they live in a home which is surrounded by 100 acres of virgin bush. And so just outside their door I was able to set up my recording device at 5 o'clock in the morning and just record that sound. And because they live in a migration corridor for birds and other animals, there was a huge proliferation of species that I hadn't been aware of, and perhaps it was because I wasn't in the moment of looking and being aware of what actually existed in that environment. Or perhaps it was that I just was oblivious to it because I was too busy thinking my own thoughts. So it's also reminding people to be mindful of a moment in time, and also to think about how that unfolds both through the act of being in the space and also in thinking about perhaps how the work has been made itself and the time involved in constructing the objects.
I know you had to get up at 5 o'clock, and some of you may recognise some of the birds. There's a kind of particular award for anybody who hears the peacocks, which are somewhere there. This is in central Victoria. Yeah.
Yes, it's in central Victoria in the gold mine region, and it was a great irony that there was a peacock recorded in the sound because, of course, the Queensland Art Gallery very generously acquired the peacock work that I made a few years ago called Phoenix, which was in the 21st Century Art of the First Decade exhibition.
That's right. Now, who else has got a question for Louise? I mean, I know that people are probably dying to come up here and enter this enchanted world, but who else? Anybody else got some questions? I've got one tiny one, which is to ask you why you've attached some cowrie shells to the bottom. Because I love cowrie shells, and there's a couple of potential answers.
Yes, well, I think you could well imagine what they might be. Well, it's obviously a very feminine symbol, and I won't say anything more about that. But also, it's not the only thing hidden in the object. So there are other things hidden within it, and there are other things hidden around the space which are available to those who want to spend time with the work.
Okay, that's very interesting, because hiding in plain sight, of course, you know, some of us will think about some of the excellent work done in film theory and psychoanalytic theory, in fact, about hiding in the light, you know, being present, not being hidden by being present, and how strategies of subterfuge are, how presenting oneself is often a strategic issue for women, and how one makes oneself present and visible is a strategic issue for women. Now, any other questions or comments for Louise? Yes, down here. I'll give you the microphone.
Yes, thank you, Louise. It's wonderful work. I just didn't quite catch, because you were saying so many things, actually. I just didn't quite catch what you said here about this piece and the circus act and how that intersected with women's lives for you.
It was just
because I thought that was
an
really
aside,
interesting.
really.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
something that Julie had actually said to me, which No, yes. Which is probably when you were at your
Oh, the
busiest.
balancing act. I've got it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just a funny
It's
aside.
the problem of the literal imagination.
No, it's also, there is a sense of, quite an evident sense of humour in the work, which I acknowledge wholeheartedly and hope other people see as well, because I think,
Well, when I first asked Louise, what do you want to do? And she looked at me straight-facedly and said, a bird hide. I thought, Ripper. Because we were talking so seriously about your work at the Adelaide Biennial 2 years ago, and we were looking at these very beautiful and refined abstract things, and then Louise said yes, she would like to explore.
I wonder why you look so stony-faced.
So wow, a group of works. I mean, the particular invitation was to construct not one but a number of works that might sit together in dialogue with each other, and that, of course, it's been most beautifully achieved. Are there any final? Oh yes, there's one here from Catmore.
Thanks, Louise. Look, just picking up on Julie's comments about subterfuge and hiding the light and hidden objects and things. I'm really curious about the black object on the behind you there. Do you want to just talk a little bit more about the actual form itself and the object?
It's based from looking in the landscape at natural forms like wasps' nests and resin that emerges from boughs that have been damaged, and just thinking about the idea of metastasizing growths, things that are aberrant growths that form and erupt and mutate, and that relationship to both the female form and the idea of things that potentially it could be considered in relationship to the way that women often in the past have needed to or felt compelled to constrain their bodies in different ways with different apertures and forms in order to create a sense of an ideal or an idealised form. And my fascination with how that has changed in different cultures over centuries as another way, another level of control, potentially, whether it's self-imposed or by other people.
All right. Louise, it's been a wonderful talk and most ably interpreted for us by Shane, who's fantastic. If there are no... Ripper, Shane. If there are no more questions... Oh yes, I don't know how we do it. Fantastic. If there are no more questions, I'm going to ask all of you to thank Louise for her most generous talk and for this beautiful, beautiful work.
Oh, thank you, Julie.